Hey everyone. Awesome. As you're joining, you can just put your name and information in the chat, which organization you're from and where you're from. And yeah, so welcome to our Time to Act Substance Use Echo. Awesome. So we're recording this session, as you heard, and this is just for educational and quality improvement purposes. So by participating in the session, you're consenting to be recorded, and if you don't wish to be recorded, you can just disconnect now. Awesome. So participation, Echo is an interactive community. So we encourage you guys to network in the chat or just through the breakout sessions. And then if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat or wait until afterwards to ask the questions and come off mute. And then we also do case narratives and discussions, and that's a great way to get support on a case you might be struggling with. And then we do ask that you protect individual privacy by de-identifying any examples you might use with people. So avoid using their real first, middle, or last name or initials. Don't identify family members, friends, coworkers. And if you're kind of unsure about what it means to de-identify, you can reach out to a hub member and they should have an asterisk in front of their name. So key components of an echo session, we first will start with a didactic speaker. And today we have Stephen Parker. And he's going to speak on trust-based relational intervention. And and then afterwards we will have our case presentation and we'll go into breakout rooms to discuss recommendations. And then just throughout the session, we encourage you guys just to network in the chat and just come off mute and talk to each other. So we do ask that you rename your profile with your first and last name, your state, your job title, and your organization. You can also, if you click on the participant icon on the bottom menu of the Zoom window, you can click on your profile and then rename it in the dialog box. So you can see that right there. And then if you have any questions, you can use the raise your hand feature. It's just basically a little reaction and we will call attention to you. And then if you'd like to pre-register, this will allow you to receive materials and reminders in advance. You can email us at projectscope@usu.edu to pre-register. And then as far as credit for attendance, you basically just have to fill out our survey, which we will be dropping in the chat throughout the session. And then in about a month, you'll receive your certificate of attendance. Awesome. And then Canvas is where we store all of our materials. We have our presentations, case study presentations, and case recommendations. So if you'd like to get access to our Canvas page, you can once again email projectscope@usu.edu, and then we'll get you on there. And then, like I said before, we do case studies at the end of our sessions, and that allows you to share information about real life situations that you might be dealing with. So yeah, we usually go into breakout rooms and then you get to hear from your colleagues about recommendations and receive valuable feedback. And so once again, you can email us if you're interested in doing that. And then here's our social media pages. We have Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you follow us, it's a really great way to just get reminders on sessions and just information on what topics are coming up and also just old information from other sessions that you might have missed. So yeah. At this point, I'm going to turn the time over to Stephen Parker, and he's going to be speaking to us today. So you're welcome to share your slides now. I'll stop sharing them.
You got it now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, let's get this started before I mess anything else up. um, my name's Steve Parker. I'm a family support specialist with Family Outreach in Helena, Montana. I just want to share a few things which you'll help understand later on. My parents had the first foster child when I was 4 years old and basically had foster children through the rest of my life and still had them when I left for college. I started working with children at the age of 15. And I worked at a home for troubled boys when I was in college and would on summer and on breaks would go there like as an assistant house parent. I have two sons that are diagnosed with autism from one was diagnosed at 5 and the other at 6, and the 6-year-old's adopted. I was a volunteer chaplain at a correctional facility for youth in jail. I was youth pastor for 20 years. I was substitute teacher at a charter school. Worked as a mental health counselor at Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch. Counselor at a therapy group home in with Youth Dynamics. And like I said, I'm a family support specialist now with Family Outreach. I'm sharing all those things because TBRI was, there we go. TBRI has changed my life. I wish I would have learned about TBRI back when I was 15 years old. It would have saved a lot of headache for my kids, I'm sure. And it's just changed my life completely. And so I just kind of, this is a real brief overview of what TBRI is. It is a holistic intervention. That means it's been developed over the past decade. Karen Purvis, if you go on YouTube, you'll see a lot about her. It's evidence-based. It's based on evidence with the whole child. Everything that they have done is based on evidence. And it started back in 2016. They started with a bunch of kids who came from hard places, and I'll explain more about that. This last one, an approach to caregiving that is developmentally respectful, responsive to trauma, and attachment based, which I'll explain more in a little bit. But that's what it's about. It's been, like I said, based on research, and the principles are used with children, youth, and I like the natural development trajectory, which I'll explain more as we go along. There's so much that has helped and that it is been used. It's been so helpful, not just as far as me as I work with my families in early intervention, but in my own personal life with my now 13-year-old son. It's made a big difference. They've been used in homes, schools, residential facilities, orphanages. Actually, when I was in training in Salt Lake City, in Utah, you guys know, when I was in training there, I actually met with some people who were correctional officers at youth facilities, and they talked about how they used to have like 85 incidents a month, and when they started training with TBRI, those incidents went from 85 down to 15. So it's been used all over the place, and it was started out geared for kids who come from hard places. But the thing is, I feel it's for all children, all families. The principles, like I said, if I had learned this earlier, I think it would have made things a lot easier for my son, my children. It would have been easier as a youth pastor, as working in these other facilities, because I learned about trauma-based TCI, all different types of stuff. But this is the best, and that's why I love sharing and talking about it. About in February of 2023, I came across this webinar, and I watched it. And in the webinar, Barbara Sorrells mentions Karen Purvis, and I began looking at that, and that's when I first heard about TBRI. But this article on trauma sensitive care, a lot of the principles that are part of TBRI, Barbara talks about it, and a lot of the principles as far as the brain being changed and the effects of it. So I would recommend and it's this link is in the chat. I would recommend that you watch this webinar. All you do is you click on the link and then you put in your email address, and then you can watch it. And there's a lot more webinars there, but this one, there was so much that was said, and I just watched it again a little bit ago, and there were so many things that talks about trauma and the effect of trauma on children, on babies and infants. And this is the wall of development that she talks about in there. And one of the things that I learned from it was the trauma of stress and how it affects children. So, like when they're stressed, cortisol is released when the mom is under stress. We all know, drugs and alcohol and stuff is bad, but I never realized or heard as much as how bad stress is and how the cortisol is released and how, the babies just kind of sit in there and it affects them in their brain development. There's a lot of things that she talks about. So I encourage you guys to really check out this webinar and understanding the risks of a difficult pregnancy, a difficult birth, all these other things, hospitalization, that one of the things that I also learned from this, I thought about this is, when a child is in NICU and it's not receiving the touch that it needs to receive, it's getting poked and prodded and that sort of stuff. And we don't ever think about that as trauma. So, well, that's what the child needs. But you think about all the stuff that they are going through and how to them that would feel like, abuse. So I encourage you guys to check that out. But TBRI is all about understanding the trauma that these kids have gone through, because it is geared towards this care and purpose for kids who come from hard places. It was initially started for foster care as well as adopt parents. And so it was geared towards helping those children. One of the biggest things that when I started going through, so what happened is after I saw this video, I started looking into care and purpose, and then I came across TBRI and everything like that. It was like a few days after that the state came to Family Outreach and said, listen, we'll pay for 2 people to go to TBR training. I'm like, oh, hey, send me, please. And so that began a series of training that they said it was only going to be like 20 hours of online training. Well, it was more like 40, but it was so much that I learned from it. But I think this principle here, the mindset of TBRI, is the thing that just impacted me the most, because I grew up, willful disobedience was a mindset. You do something wrong, that's willfully, and it was a power to, I'm going to change your behavior, whether it was from, I got that from my parents and I passed it on down. And most of the facilities that I went to, that's what it's about. It was about, here's this behavior. We have got to change it. We're going to bend it, break it, whatever it is to get them to do what we want, versus the survival behavior. What's behind this behavior? What's the purpose of it? And this is the mantra that TBRI has, that I use all the time. I have it on my refrigerator at home. I give this out to my families all the time. Stay calm. No matter what's happening, you got to stay calm. See the need, what's behind this behavior, meet the need, find a way to, help resolve it, and don't quit, because if you do, then who's going to do it? So this is a great mantra that I have to apply to myself all the time. The 3 pillars of TBRI is felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. And as we go through here, you're going to hear these terms all the time: felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. And as we go through here, we'll talk more about it. The basic TBRI principles are the connecting, empowering, and correcting principles. We're going to be looking at those 3, and I'm just flying through this, guys, because there's so much and so important. I don't want you guys to miss out on anything. And I'll have some time for questions if there's anything. Okay, so here we go. The principles, strategies, and practices. So we're going to start with connecting, then we're going to talk about empowering, and then we're going to talk about correcting. And the thing is, it's important to understand these connecting principles are important for the empowering as well as the correcting aspect of, as we're going to see as we get through here. So the connecting principles are about mindfulness and engagement. Mindfulness, being aware of who I am, where I'm from, what I've been through. When I started, before I even got into TBRI, I had to do an adult attachment interview. And it's basically where they kind of talk with you, and it's 2 hours long, and you talk about all the stuff that happened in your past as a child. I had been through that, but it had been years ago, and you know, I'll just put it this way: it was very moving. It took me like 2 weeks to recover, you know, because it was just brought up a lot of stuff, and it's important that we are mindful and aware of where we are and how that's going to affect who we're interacting with our children and stuff. And the engagement strategies, we'll be talking more about those as we go through. I want to play this. Hopefully you guys can hear this about talking about the connecting principles. Can you guys hear that? Great.
We all want the best for our families. But even with the best intentions, things don't always go as smoothly as we'd like.
You're so mean. I hate you.
For parents who foster or adopt children with histories of trauma, abuse, or neglect, the challenges can be enormous. Maybe your child is acting out, or you sense emotional distance. Or maybe the stress of conflict in your family is pushing you to the breaking point. Most people aren't aware of this, but researchers say behavioral problems can be clear symptoms of attachment problems, giant clues that something is amiss in the child's emotional connection or attachment to the parent. And the quality of the parent-child attachment predicts success in life. Our goal with this video is to explain this critically important concept of attachment, how it works, how to identify it, what happens when it gets derailed, and the vital role parents play in all of it. We'll help you recognize signs of insecure attachments and how to shore up your connection with your child.
For several decades, we have understood what is called the attachment cycle. And what it says is that a baby cries and a caregiver comes. And the baby cries and the caregiver comes. It happens, if you think about it, hundreds of thousands of times in the earliest years of life. This baby cries and the caregiver comes, and the child learns that their needs are going to be met. So they learn trust, which is the lesson of the first year of life. I can trust.
Abuse, neglect, or abandonment derails development in an infant. And even before a child is born, development can be disrupted by drugs or alcohol, stressful pregnancy, or a traumatic birth. Even well-meaning medical interventions or life-saving surgeries are encoded into a child's brain as trauma. The end result is children with layers upon layers of what's called complex developmental trauma. Dr. Purvis prefers the term children from hard places.
When you think about development, a mom and a dad say yes for 2 years of life. The baby cries, and I say, yes, I will feed you. Cries, yes, I will warm you. Yes, I will comfort you. Yes, I will cradle you. Yes, I will sing to you. And so this child learns not only that they're precious, that they have a voice, that they cry, somebody shows up. But this child learns that it matters if they have needs. And so this happens over and over and over again. We call it the giving of yeses. There are so many children in our society and globally in the society of the world that have come from hard places. They've been harmed or abused. They've suffered trauma or endured hardships. And for those children, learning to trust, or their capacity to trust, has been fiercely damaged. They didn't get a lot of yeses. And if you look at research in the last 20 years, what is very, very sobering, we know that the brain chemistry of a child who cries and no one comes is dramatically altered. The stress system stays on fight, flight, or freeze. The gas pedal is stuck at 120 miles an hour for that child emotionally and behaviorally. The attachment bond is about optimal development for every child. While it's essential for every child, the child who has come from a hard place with a history of trauma or loss or abuse has no hope of healing without a nurturing, caring, attachment relationship.
That's a sobering reality, but there is reason for hope. Just as neuroscientists have documented how trauma harms the brain, research shows that the right kind of nurturing can help heal the brain.
The way we communicate with a child actually can stimulate the growth of certain areas of that child's brain that help them regulate things like emotion and attention, and even how they come to understand themselves and understand others. So whether you're a parent who's been a part of giving birth to a child, or even an adoptive or foster parent, you are the biological parent of this child, because the communication patterns you offer, the way you connect with your child, the way you have a relationship with your child, actually stimulates the firing of particular patterns in the brain that then get the brain to grow in specific ways, so that it becomes a biological reality how your relationship changes the structure of your child's brain. And when those attachment patterns are what's called secure, the parts of the brain that keep the brain growing well and resilient grow beautifully. And that's what you can offer to your child.
Okay. That guy that you saw at the end, Dan Siegel, he has written some books called The Whole Brain Child, Parenting from the Inside Out, as well as Drama-Free Discipline. I encourage you all to read them. They're really good. And a lot of what he's talking about there is how, these kids who come from hard places, and I see it all the time in my line of work, there is so much. It's like, okay, it's not where you can't do anything about it. You can. The brain can be, they used to think the brain was more like cement. Now it's like called the plasticity of the brain. It can be changed. And in the attachment styles, they said, a needs expressed, a needs met. Baby cries, we pick them up or whatever. That develops trust, self-worth, self-efficiency, self-regulation, and mental health. Those terms are important in that attachment style. And part of there's 4 different types of style. And we don't have time to get into all that right now, but when it's not met, you'll see here when the needs expressed and it's not met, this leads to chronic distress. You'll notice it shows here like from 2 to 3 years, behavioral dysregulation, ADD, ADHD, and symptoms. From 4 to 6, depression, anxiety. From 8 to 10, and 12 plus, bipolar disorder and other emotional problems. So if it's not dealt with, but that's what TBRI is about, helping kids who come from hard places, or just regular kids who have been through a lot of stress. Maybe there's been a lot of trauma in their birth. They can get help in that. So looking at the connecting principles, there's 2 aspects. There's mindfulness, and then there's the engagement. Mindfulness is understanding, remembering, where I come from. That whole understanding the attachment that I had, or where I am right now. And that, when something happens, where am I? My calm presence, am I attuned and aware of what they're feeling, how they're feeling, what my son is going through at the time? And the other is engagement, like importance of eye contact. And the thing is, when I look at my son, when something has happened, I want to make sure that when I'm looking at him and using eye contact, it's not angry eyes, but it's gentle, caring eyes. That the voice I'm using, it's a kind, gentle voice. But I need to be aware and mindful of where I'm at and my calm. And that's where that mantra that I talked about before, the stay calm. Many times I have to stop. Like the other day, my son came in, he was having, he was typical disrespectful and everything, and it was kind of pushing my buttons. So I just said, hold on a minute. And I walked, I said, I need to take a minute. I walked away to get myself calm so I come back and I could look at him with soft eyes, with not angry eyes, and use the proper tone in my voice, making sure I'm aware of and being mindful of my interactions with him. The engagement is about different ways of engagement, the behavior matching and the nurturing touch, putting my hand on his shoulder in a gentle way, or let me see those eyes, or like I'll get down on his level and say, let me see those eyes. And many times he's too upset. The other day he was really upset. He just didn't want to look at me and didn't want to think. And I said, come on, let me see those beautiful brown eyes. And he wasn't looking at me. So I said, let me see those pink and blue eyes. And he went. He looked right back at me. It's just different ways in interacting and engaging. Warm eyes, the voice quality, the playful engagement. We're going to talk more about that later on. And then we get into the what's called the empowering principles. All right. And this has to do with ecological or physiological, sort of like one is about the environment, the other is about the body, hydration, blood sugar, healthy touch, physical activity. Again, involving some of those things from the connecting principles. I'm just going to play this.
Your child's behavior
Can you guys
is
hear
not
that?
who they are. It's the result of trauma suffered early in life that derailed normal development.
Quite simply, without tender care in early days of life, children's brains are different. Their capacity to learn, to think, to process is vastly different from a child who hasn't come from her place.
When you are deprived of those early experiences, you might as well be deprived of food, because your nervous system is not going to develop normally. It's as if you didn't have zinc or iron or vitamin D or something else, or that was necessary for that system to develop.
Now that you understand what your child never got, in this chapter, we'll show you how to begin filling in the gaps and empower your children to reach their greatest potential.
You like bubblegum? Yeah. No. Many times I'm asked, where do I start? There's just so much to do and I don't know where to start. Start by developing trust. And trust is earned through something we call felt safety.
It is impossible for a child to grow and become healthy unless they feel safe. We'll see you, little buddy. So felt safety is the cornerstone of everything we need to do with these kids.
Felt safety means the child feels safe. It's different from you knowing they're safe.
That was cool, wasn't it?
Many children are safe in their dark rooms at night. You know they're safe because you turned on the alarm. But the child may not feel safe. So how do I help my child know in a language that registers in their little being that they're safe?
It's not a cognitive thing. It's the way we feel. It's an emotional. So safety at this primitive level is not something you know so much as you feel. It's in your very being.
Okay, use your words and tell me what you want to do. Let me see eyes.
In our children, this need to feel safe has really never been met. And It's a driving force in everything that they do.
Think of the empowering principles like mulch in a garden. You want to create an attachment-rich, sensory-rich environment to give your children the nurturing and care they never received.
Oh, do we get worn out?
The really tricky part for most of our parents are they will say, well, he's 10 years old, he shouldn't still have this problem. Well, remember that the brain development that he needed to be a healthy 10-year-old was the first 3 years of life. If there was any failure in the first 3 years of life, you start with him with this need. Now, tell me about your night. How did your night go? The message we want to give our children is there's a safe adult on duty. You can be a little kid, and I'm going to take care of you.
There, so in there, she talked about felt safety, and as I was saying from that, when I talked about the trauma sensory care video, if you watch that, she talks about felt safety all the time, and so what we're trying to do is to empower them to feel safe, so they can interact appropriately. And there's two ways: through physiological strategies, which is physical, which is internal, and the ecological, in other words, that which is going on the outside of understand. And part of the physiological strategies is understanding sensory processing. And there's a lot of, I'm just going to do this short because this part, the internal senses and the physiological strategies as far as sensory issues, is a lot to cover, but I'll just
When we think of the senses, vision, taste, hearing, touch, and smell immediately spring to mind. These are sometimes called the external senses. But our sensory system is much more complex. Less familiar but vital to normal development are the internal or body-centered senses. Our vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile senses define our place in the physical world.
Vestibular is the inner ear fluid in this circular canal. It tells us when we move our head where we are in space. Proprioceptive is how deeply we're being touched. Our muscles register. And tactile is just simply that sense of touch. So we have external senses and we have internal senses. They all help us make sense of the world around us.
Touch is the first sense to develop in utero, and it's fully functioning by the time we make our debut onto the world stage.
Right away, the baby knows how to respond to a gentle touch. If you stroke a newborn on his cheek, he'll turn toward that touch, and they love cuddling, love being stroked, and they're learning so much through their tactile systems. Babies also come out with their vestibular system in pretty good order. You give a baby a finger, and that little hand will clutch it because that's something to hang on to so he won't fall.
A baby fine-tunes his or her delicate sensory system through nurturing experiences with a loving caregiver.
When the baby is born, every time they cry and we pick them up, there's the movement in the vestibular fluid. And so every time a child is loved and held and cradled and rocked, they're having an experience, vestibular activity.
And it's those kinds of experiences that provide the sensory bath that helps their nervous system organize and be able to process all kinds of information in a normal, healthy, optimal way.
So you see in the sensory input is part of that, part of that physiological strategies is trying to help them feel safe in their sensories where they're feeling protected. There's someone there who's caring for them. And again, I keep referring back to that video, trauma sensory care. There's so much more information. I encourage you guys to go and watch that. I learned a whole lot from that second and third time. But the sensory input is from sight, sound, as they said, the touch, the tactile, the taste, the smell. And sometimes, some children are receiving too much, and Dan Siegel talks about, he does this really good thing where he talks about, I'm not sure if you guys ever seen that thing where he talks about your brain is like a hand and all the different parts. And sometimes when they get too much sensory input, they flip their lid and they're just, I encourage you to listen to and that a whole brain child, as he talks a lot about that. I'm just flying through here because I want to cover everything. Sorry about that. Physiological strategies. It's talking about hydration, glucose. The importance of you have with the child, you're empowering them when you give them enough drinking because that hydration influence concentration, memory, anxiety level, and mood. You think about yourselves when you have been, running a mile or something like that or whatever, and how it affects you. So that's important. So when we're looking at this ecological and physiological, is like the blood sugar, making sure you're getting the proper amount of water as well as the proper food, types of food, like foods that aren't like one of the things that we learned early on with our autistic son was to keep him away from um, uh, food dyes and preservatives and additives. And we put him on a completely natural diet. And whenever he was off that, or whenever he cheated, we could tell by his behavior how it affected him. Having a healthy touch, because you got to think about a lot of these kids come from hard places. They may not have had a healthy touch. They may not have had that calming, as Karen was saying, those first few months of life where there was that constant, responding and the attachment that was developed there. And just the sensory issues. And now talking about the ecological, in other words, the environment. And in that is talking about transitions, scaffolding and self-regulation, but transition things. One of the things that we had to learn with our son was that we had to warn him, and I'm sure you guys may have heard this, the front loading. Okay, in 15 minutes, we're going to do this. In 10 minutes, we're going to do this. In 5 minutes, the transition note cards are, hey, it's sort of like this is the schedule of your day. Here's a note card so they kind of know what's coming next. The frequent reminders, a visual schedule, those kind of things. Again, that's helping. That's empowering them in the environment that they're in. Here's a video that kind of talks about some of the scaffolding, self-regulation that they were doing. What you're seeing in these videos, this is back in 2016 when Karen Purvis started working with these are all kids who are foster kids or come from adopted situations. It's very interesting when these kids came in to this day camp, okay, and you'll see all the adults and the kids, they were paired up the whole time. When they came in, their cortisol level was double that of a normal child. After the first week was still the double. After the second week, it was almost back to normal. And by the end of the 6 weeks, their cortisol level was completely normal level. And the cortisol is, that from the stress and everything, because they had consistency in their environment. There was felt safety, there was connection, and they were learning self-regulation. And this is kind of talks a little bit about self-regulation skills.
Does anybody know what self-regulate means? What does it mean?
Calm yourself by yourself.
There you go. Calm yourself by yourself.
Self-regulation is kind of a mouthful for a small child, but we try to teach them the term because it's an important term. Self-regulation simply means I'm learning to monitor my behaviors and thoughts and actions, and then I'm learning to modulate them.
Did you hear that?
Beep, 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 beep,
Okay.
beep.
So what does that mean? John Nathaniel.
Because this is one area where children who come from hard places have a lot of difficulty. They have a trouble regulating their emotions. They have trouble regulating their behaviors. They have trouble regulating their thoughts.
Exhale.
There are many playful exercises you can do with your child to help him or her learn how to self-regulate.
3 things that we can do to calm ourselves.
One skill we might teach them is how to hold a pressure point and count.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, how many of y'all feel a little calmer again?
And then we'll check the engine again. And if some of the engines are still in the red, we might do another activity.
Push up. 1, 2, 3.
We might ask them to do a chair sit-up, which is where they push up and count to 10.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ooh, that's nice. Another blanket could be shared by a couple of people, right?
We might invite them to use a little weighted blanket that is self-calming, or a little neck weight that is calming.
Yeah.
We're going to have a difficult conversation, or we're going to talk about tough things. We may give them a wad of bubble gum or a sweet supper to chew on.
You're getting muscles. Whoa. Keep pushing.
Pushing against a wall is a great calming technique.
These experiences are designed to provide children with the kinds of sensory and muscular stimulation that will help their nervous system organize itself so they can do the things that are required of them. So they can learn, they can read, they can interact with others.
Push it.
Even the choice of certain foods can help a child self-regulate.
Oh, yeah. Okay, when you get hungry, would you let your buddy know if you're ready for a snack?
What we know is that foods that are sweet are calming. Foods that are sour are alerting. Deep, are you breathing too, buddy?
Just as children take that first step of awareness towards self-regulation, so should parents.
Now, parents, when y'all go home, this is a cool thing to put on the fridge door for everybody's family, or someplace in the house. And every family member can check a few times a day, like maybe before meals or sometimes, just check engine.
For better or worse, how your engine is running and how you respond to your child directly impacts his or her behavior.
John Nathaniel, how do we regulate? How do we make our engine green, John Nathaniel? John Nathaniel, we don't hurt our friends.
It's also critical for parents to recognize the difference between a child being willful and a child who is incapable of regulating without help.
Jonathan, can you regulate yourself? It is Miss Karen. Okay, I'm gonna give you 1 minute to regulate yourself. Let me see yourself regulate.
Then that's at your heart.
There are signs you can look for to help determine your child's ability to control his or her behavior.
So see, what I'm going to do is that's a good boy right there. And I put my hand there, but I'm monitoring his heart. And you'll find that a lot of times when they look behaviorally blinded, the heart's just pounding through the chest. Okay. So we're going to start watching for, can I touch your cheek? We're going to start watching for how tight this is. We're going to look for pupil dilation. We're gonna just do this sometimes, or we can put our hand on the shoulder in his pulse and feel. Hey, sweetie, tell me what you need. Okay. And we're also going to be looking for how deep the breathing is. Those are all stress systems.
Oops. So you see in that presentation, there were a lot of different types of self-regulation, types of skills. It's again empowering, teaching them. And the thing is, teaching the self-regulation skills, it's important to do it not when they're upset, but to do it when they're calm, or making games out of it, doing different things. And they talk about sensory buckets, the pillow sandwich, where I do that with my son a lot of times. He'll be on his bed and I'll wrap him up and just kind of land on him or wrestle with him, or it's kind of like calming him, feeling that blanket around him. Wall pushes, also the putting the finger under the nose. A lot of these I will share with my families. And again, remember, we talked about the 3. It's felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. So we're teaching them self-regulation to help. Daily schedule can also help by having certain rituals and routines. Like at bedtime, a certain ritual. We have a certain routine in the morning and at night that he goes through that helps keep things in line, keep things calming for him. Okay. And then we're going to be moving on to the correcting. Now, when we're going to talking about the correcting, it's important to realize that a lot of these principles are still part of the correcting. All right. The balances between structure and nurture, because it's, we don't, it's not like, oh, you don't do structure anymore, but you do structure and you do nurture, and there's a balance between those two. That we'll talk about the ideal and the levels of response is what we're going to be talking about. Think about the last time your child acted out. What was your response? How did you resolve the situation? After it was resolved, how did you feel? How did they feel? What could you might have done? And hopefully this will help. One thing that the goal of correction is that you stay connected, that you are content and they are content with the outcome, and that there has been a changed behavior. Okay. Correcting principles are guides for changing behavior, but connecting principles are the foundation of the relationship. The correcting we talked about, I'll go back to that in a second, but connecting principles are the foundation. You don't want to break the connection. Under the underlying goal is to teach, mentor, coach, and correct. Like I said, the goal of correction should always be connection, to stay connected. And proactive strategies are designed to teach social and behavioral skill, as well as responsive strategies are designed to help with handling of these challenging behaviors. Okay, so you've seen the connecting. Remember the calm presence, the voices, the eye contact, the authoritative, however it might be, either behavioral matching, playful interaction, all these healthy touch, all these connecting them, mindfulness and the engagement are important, having to do with the correcting. And the correcting, there's the proactive strategies and there's the responsive strategies. I'm going to kind of run through these life value skills, okay, or life value terms. There's a lot of terms that, there's a statement that sometimes as parents, we try to kill a gnat with an elephant gun. We use so many different words, and basically all they are hearing is Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. Where when you learn life value terms like with respect, use your words, with permission, redo like, hey, let's try that again with respect. I came up with one the other day. I had a parent whose child, there's safe hands when you're going to go out and walk on the street. Remember, hold hands, safe hands. A child was biting, so I came up with the term safe teeth. Just different types of life value terms to help, and then to practice those when they're calm. To practice the self-regulation skills when they're calm, not when they're, you don't try and teach them when they're upset. You have to wait till they're calm. And just like you saw Karen come in with that little boy, he self-regulated himself because he had been practicing them beforehand as they worked on that. Responsive strategies is the TBRI, ideal response and levels of response and choices and compromise, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But like I said, proactive strategies, when the children are calm, they're alert, they have all their basic needs met, all the empowerment, drinking, the proper amount of food, all those types of things. Then we can work on those self-regulation skills. Again, there's this felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. If you have the felt safety and you have the connection, then you can work on the self-regulation. Nurture group, or as I say, do with my families. I always say, use this with my families to hey guys, remember, we stick together, no hurt, have fun. If we stick together and no hurt, which means I don't hurt people by what I say, by what I do physically, then we can have fun. Stick together is I'm going to be there with you no matter what. That's the felt safety. No hurt is the connection, and we can have fun. And I encourage parents to use that whenever they're going to go and do something. Just a reminder, hey guys, stick together, no hurt, have fun. Is a great thing to use. Now, again, the ideal response, the purpose is that we stay connected, that as we go through it, that we're content at the end, and there's a changed behavior. Not just myself as the parent, but the child also feels connected, he feels content, and there's a changed behavior. Content that I understood and I heard what he had to say or what he was feeling. Okay? The ideal response stands for IDEAL. I stands for immediate response. Too many times we're sitting on the couch, on our tablets, on our phones, and hey, stop doing that from across the room. But with the ideal response is when something's happening, or I can tell Jonathan's getting upset, immediately I respond within 3 seconds or so. I'm right there. I'm in his face. It's a direct. I'm looking at him in the eye. That's where I say, you know, let me see those blue eyes, or pink or blue, or whatever it might need. And sometimes I'll put my hand gently under his chin. Let me see those beautiful brown eyes, or whatever. But it's that direct response, not from way across the room, but right there, right where he's at. And then it's efficient. This is where those life value terms comes in, where, hey, let's try that again with respect. One of the things about TBRI, it's all about redos. When I was growing up as a kid, I didn't get a chance for a redo. I did something wrong and bam, the Board of Education applied to the seat of knowledge, as my dad would say all the time. But there was no redo, where there's an opportunity. Let's try that again with respect, or they start going to do something. Hey, with permission. My son used to come in and I would be on my chair doing something, whatever, and he'd jump on me or something like that. And so when I started doing this, I would say stop, and I would hold my hand up. And after, I'd say, hey, let's, ask permission first. And after a while, I would just have to hold my hand up after a few things, or all I had to say is with permission. And what's happening now, he has learned that he when he comes up to me, he'll say, excuse me, and he waits for me to respond. It's that with permission, with respect, use your words, use safe words. There's all these terms that can be used so that I'm not just throwing all this stuff at him and preaching at him, so to speak, but it's simple terminology, those simple life skills, 2 or 3 words, and each family can make their own up as they want. Action-based. This is the important part. Many times when we do things, like say I have something in my hand and Jonathan comes up and he grabs it out of my hand. What's my normal response? We grab it back. What's he learning? He's not learning anything there. But when he does that, I'll say, stop, put it back, please. And let's try it again with permission. Okay. And then he'll say, he'll put it back in my hand. May I please have that? And then he picks it up. You know what happened there? As they talked about, earlier, what Siegel says, that brain just got a new pathway. All right. There's a new way of doing it. It's action-based, learning how to redo it. The redos, giving him the opportunity to redo it. Okay. That's why I love TBRI, the opportunity for redos. And you know what? As a parent, sometimes I need a redo also. I'll say, look, you know what, son? I didn't respond to you in the proper way, of which I should have, or wasn't with respect, or something like that. And we can have a redo. And then the L stands for, it's leveled at the behavior, not the child. Why are you such a stupid child, or any kind of thing like that? We don't want to, it's not that. The behavior wasn't good, but you are. It's in, where you set the bar in these behaviors depends on where the child is, the history, the circumstances, where you are, and you can set it a certain place and then, raise it up. Like, I don't even have to say anything now with Jonathan on a lot of these things. he automatically, I can just look at him and then he'll, without me even have to say with respect, he'll say it again in a different way. The levels of response. These have to do with the different types of engagement. You start off with playful and structured. It's talking about the different types of, like I was just talking about, the ideal response, the providing choices. And I'll explain more in a minute. Calming, when you can tell they're beyond structured, they're beyond talking to, so that you're trying to help calm them. I understand you're upset, calm them down. And then there's a protective where they're just lost it. They're in the lizard brain. So you're trying to protect them from hurting yourself or somebody else. Playful engagement. So, my son, typically, he's got stuff all over he just leaves things. He'll take his jacket off and just drop it on the floor in the living room, and I would get on his case over and over again and get upset. So what I did is, like the other day, I said, I didn't realize that the living room was your closet. Or he's always walking around without slippers on and he gets sick all the time, right? So, boy, those are really funny looking slippers. They look just like your bare feet. See, playful engagement, it's like where I can correct him and help him without him getting all upset. Oh, you're always on my case, but in a playful way, the tone of voice, all that sort of stuff. The structured engagement is where it comes into the different types of the choices, the compromise, the redos. One of the things that's really good that I like with choices and compromise. So you ask them to do something. No, I don't want to do it. Okay. So it's time to, put your toys away and go take a bath. Well, no. Well, then you can say, okay, there's two choices. One, you can put your toys away and then take a bath, or you can take a bath and then put your toys away. So you choose one or two. Which do you want to do first? It's like the first, then, if, then, first, then, that kind of thing. And if they're like, no, then, okay, so you're asking for a compromise. Now, when I first heard this, it was like, no, I'm the parent. There's no compromise. But then I realized the importance of a compromise is like, okay, so we are going to work together to solve this problem. So there's that interaction. What ideas do you have? And they may say, I play for a half hour and then I'll put him, go take a shower. And then you kind of work back together to a more reasonable understanding. And then, like I said, the calming engagement, when they're getting so out of it, you need to take some time. Now, use a time in quiet place. Too many times I ended up in timeout. And what happens in timeout? Timeout is you lose connection, right? The other day, Jonathan came in and he was being disrespectful. He was rolling his eyes and pushing all my buttons. And so I said, he's standing in front of me, and I said, I need you to calm down. So why don't you sit down? I had him sit down on the couch next to me. He said, you sit down on the couch, and when you're ready, we'll talk. And he goes, he's like, ready? I'm like, nah, you're not ready yet. So he sat down on the couch. I didn't send him away. I didn't break the connection. That felt safety was still there. And I was trying to teach him to self-regulate. He sat down on the couch. 15 minutes later, he said, okay, Dad, I'm ready. And we talked. And I said, you know what, Jonathan, one of the reasons why I had you sit down on the couch is because I was feeling a little upset myself. And I needed to calm myself down. So by doing that, I'm teaching him how to self-regulate and calming. And then the protective engagement comes when it's just like, you need to, the concern is getting him into, the person where they're safe, they're not hurting others. And again, with that, the voice comes in. the tone, the volume, the cadence, when they're really upset, then you have to talk much slower and never raise your voice up, because when we raise our voice up, they're going to go up above that. So we've talked about all these different things, and like I said, I just barely scratched the surface when talking about these different things. But I have found you do this a lot with families and talking about the ideal response and levels of response and the redos and that sort of thing. And like I said, Karen Purvis, if you read The Connected Child, basically it covers everything we talked about today, as well as The Connected Parent. And then Dan Siegel, who has The Whole Brain Child, Parenting from the Inside Out, and No Drama Discipline. I encourage you guys to read them, especially trying to understand the brain and how it also works. Now, I live in Montana, and so I reached out to Brandy Naylor. She is the one who does TBRI in Utah. And excuse me, this is her email. She said if anybody wants, they can reach her that way. And there is also a full caregiver series, which is about training people about TBRI. And the other one is is a virtual one. It's introduction and overview of TBRI. If you click on these sites, you can get tickets to go to it, or virtual to go to that one. So she sent me these. So if you have any questions, this is the person to talk to. And went over a few minutes. Sorry about that. Like I said, I could talk about TBRI all day, because you know why? It has changed my life. When I adopted my son when he was 6 years old, and I married his mom, he had come from a lot of hard times. He was one of those kids coming from hard places. And our relationship was really, really hard and rough. When I started year and a half ago, started using these principles, it changed our relationship. And it's still, really, really good. So I encourage you guys to really look into this, especially if you're working with families, if you're working with early intervention. It's a great way to help the parents to know how to deal with kids who their kids may have been through trauma, been through a lot of medical trauma. All right, I'll stop talking.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're just going to leave a little bit of time for questions if you're all right with that.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, if you want to put your questions into the chat or just come off mute and talk to us, this is a great opportunity to learn a lot more about this topic. So yeah, just put the questions in the chat. Okay, looking like we're not having.
Sorry, I have a question. How long does it take usually to get through the process? Did you say 8 weeks? 8 to 12 with helping?
Oh, well,
or over and over. I'm sure over and over again, but like initially, how long does the course for kids take to help them feel better?
Okay, so as far as being like I went through the process to be able to it took me it started in February, and then the training to become a practitioner was a week long in Salt Lake City. But if you, like I said, when I first heard about it, it was like I was so overjoyed and it meant so much. I went through it and saw a lot of stuff on YouTube, watched a lot of YouTube videos before they even gave me a lot of the resources. So, it just depends. And I like work with the families all the time. When I first talked to parents about it, there's like about 10 or 15 different types of different videos and things from YouTube that are like 5 minutes long that explains what attachment style is, that explains what ideal is about. And there are these cartoons, you know, how they draw cartoons and stuff like that, and that explains things. So a lot of that is if you go to YouTube and you look up TBRI or Karen Purvis, there's all sorts of stuff. Plus, they also have the um uh, I forget child development from TCU. They have a lot of podcasts and stuff, so they'll talk about all sorts of things, and it's all free to if you want to learn about it. And again, depending on how long it goes through with the child, it depends on this each situation, each family, and how open they are to the principles that you want to share with them. Did that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, if you call Brandy there and contact her, you know, she can tell you more about what is available in Utah. Like I said, I wish I had come across TBRI 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whatever would have been better for my kids, I believe. Plus, in helping with all the places that I worked at, the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch and therapeutic group home. I mean, I think back on, you know, the stuff that we did. If we had known and had this TBRI, I think it would have been a whole lot different and behaviors would have been changed because we're looking at what is the reason behind this behavior. Not that I'm going to change it. What's the reason why? You know, what survival skills that they're trying to, you know, those things, you know, stay calm, see the need, meet the need, don't quit. I'm always saying it to myself, especially when it comes to a 13-year-old.
I just wanted to hop on. I got on and just to introduce myself. I'm Brandy Naylor. I'm with Raise the Future in Utah. So I've been communicating with Stephen just about TBRI and more than welcome to answer more questions. We have research as well as studies and things like that that TBRI has done. I also linked the website to KPICD to kind of give just a broad perspective of what it is. We're at Raise the Future, we're ambassadors of TBRI, and we've seen it been used in all kinds of different, like he had said in his presentation, we use it within foster care, but also within clinical services for substance abuse, as well as for human trafficking. And it really is the way that it's training for adults to show up in the best trauma-informed way. What I also love about it is it's not just trauma-informed, it's also trauma healing, and gives that information on how to not just be informed that there is trauma, but what we can do as adults and professionals to show up in a way that helps heal that trauma. Any kind of other like parenting or caregiving modality, I have noticed, assumes there's a healthy connection or a healthy attached relationship. And what TBRI does not assume is that there is that, and that relationship matters in whether we heal from anything that we are working with through. So would love to communicate and contact any with any of you. Just let me know. I keep trying to put in some references for the research that KPICD has done, but it won't let me put it in this chat. But if there's another email, I can send it to Stephen and he can get it to the right people as well. But thank you so much for letting me join this training too. It's been great.
Thanks, Brandy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I also agree. I used to work at a summer camp with kids, and I agree that like when we took the time to actually understand the reasons behind when they were struggling and when they were acting out, we had a lot better responses and we had them actually change their behavior and listen a lot more. So I also wish I had known about this a little bit more before that experience. So do we have any more questions or are we looking good to wrap up? I'll wait a couple more minutes. See.
If there's anybody from Montana on here. There's an organization called Child Bridge that is also like what Brandy was saying, does represent TBRI in Montana.
Perfect. Well, looks like we don't have any more questions. So yeah, I think we will probably just forego the case presentation. It was a practice one this session, so we will probably just save it for another time. But yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. This was really eye-opening and it really helped us out, I think all of us. So thank you for being here and presenting for us.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me share this. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So our next session will be December 11th, and we hope to see you all there. And have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. You too.